Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the podcast. It's episode 177, and we finished up the Volunteer Bootcamp series of episodes, the last 6 episodes where we talked all about recruiting and onboarding and encouraging. Now we're kind of getting back to our normal rhythm with different interviews with folks, and today I talk with Jeff Bates of Elevation Church, and we talk about family ministry at Elevation Church, kids ministry, student ministry, things that Jeff is learning, working on, trying to improve, all of that kind of stuff. So we bounce around a number of different topics, but I really enjoy it because I just love hearing what people are thinking about, working on, trying to improve, all that stuff. So we look at that in this interview. Before we jump into that, want to let you know about a couple webinars. We just had one last week. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that. That was called Creating Sensational Ministry Environments. You can always get all of our webinars with Ministry Boost. You can rewatch them after they're finished. If you weren't able to come live, we have something called the Webinar Archive. And so you can go on ministryboost.org, click on webinars, and sign up to get access to any of those. But we have 2 more that are coming up you don't want to miss. One is all about keeping kids safe online and how we can equip parents to do that. That's happening Thursday, February 6th, 11:30 a.m. Eastern. So that's just over a week away. And then the next week after that, we have a big webinar called Developing Leaders, a Pipeline and a Plan for Growing Your Ministry Team. And we're going to announce on that webinar something big for Ministry Boost, something new. So we hope you can make it. It's Wednesday, February 12th, 1 p.m. Eastern. Now, I mentioned the one that we just did called Creating Sensational Ministry Environments. One thing that we shared in there, we shared a bunch of ways that you can engage the 5 senses to help people's experience at your church be a memorable one, maybe even wow them. And there were a few hacks that we shared in there, a bunch of tips and all that. One of them that we talked about, though, was how to do digital signage with TVs for an affordable way. And this is something I've always wanted. We've done this in different ways in my church. Sometimes having a TV with like a USB stick and putting an image on there, and it's really clunky and you got to load them up and change them, and it's just a hassle, all that stuff. There are solutions out there. There've been solutions out there that are great, but some of them are great, some are not so great, but many times the great ones are expensive. But we've come across the solution. It's actually from a kids pastor, so he understands the world that many of us live and serve in, and it's a great solution. If you go to ministryboost.org/screens, you can learn more about it. But basically for $10 a month, you can put content on your TV screens and use it for digital signage, or maybe it's controlling curriculum, whatever it might be. It works off the Amazon Fire Stick, which I love. That makes it easy. It's basically an app on the Amazon Fire Stick, and then you log into a website where you upload your images, your video, create playlists and categories, and then you can schedule what plays when. And you can even do crazy things like show something on the top third of the screen and something else on the bottom 2/3, or put in like the live stream of your service if that TV is somewhere, that you want to show that, and you can do that easily. So it's $10 a month per screen. It's $8 a month if you have more than 10 screens like we do at our church. But that's something I want to let you know about. I feel like it's like a something I got really excited about once we learned it existed. We had actually been trying to figure out a way to create it ourselves, but we're not programmers, so that never happened. And meanwhile, this existed the whole time. So we're kind of friends with the team that does this kind of a new thing, newer thing. So check that out if you're interested, ministryboost.org/screens, and check out those webinars. We got the 2 coming up. And the one we just did, if you watch that one, you can see us demo this thing that I'm talking about, both the website where you update it and even see what it looks like on a TV. But enough of that. Let's go ahead now and jump into this interview. As always, you can get the links and notes and all that at nickblevins.com/episode 177. But let's listen in as I talk with Jeff Bates about what's going on in family ministry at Elevation Church. Well, today I'm joined on the podcast by Jeff Bates. Welcome to the podcast, Jeff.
Hey, Nick. It's great to be here.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at Elevation Church as we get started.
Yeah, so I'm the campus ministries pastor at Elevation. When I started 2 years ago in this role, I was a family pastor. It was just kids and youth. And now we've added some more of the ministries along with that. So we've got kids groups. We call it guest experience, which is our volunteer base. So I oversee the central team to help support all of these campuses we have all over the place. And before that was a campus pastor for 4 years. And just had fun, building campus ministries on a campus level. And then when I got to step in for the gentleman who stepped out before me, they said, "Hey, you seem to use campus ministries to grow what you got there. So why don't you come help do that centrally and really support these campuses as we continue to launch them?" So it's been great. It's been it's interesting being in a central team as opposed to being on the campus. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
So you were in that kind of family life role, and that's kind of a central role too for you, or at least it was, right? Is that rolled into your thing now, or is there another person on staff that's just focusing on that?
No, that's part of my role. So I've got, like I said, kids groups and guest experience, and then youth was with me for a little while, and now we've kind of isolated that one for some different reasons. But my central eKids director, she is like the central eKids support for all of our campuses. And I really have told them, like, hey, this is too much for one person to really drive. So my role is really to be like more of a GPS. And their model is like, you are the drivers of your areas of ministry. And so I need you innovating, and then I can help give guidance. Like, yes, that's taking us in the right direction, or no, that's taking us sideways. One of my frustrations as a campus pastor was I loved campus ministries. I loved eKids and what youth was doing, but it always felt like all the different ministries had great vision, but they were running in different directions. And so therefore on the campus level, my campus staff felt like they were running in different directions. And I was like, this thing is like falling apart or like running away from itself. I need to like bring them all together. So when I got to step into this role, first thing I did was like get everyone around the same table and like, guys, we got to at least like schedule together and figure out the commonalities, the common tensions, and we got to work together so that we can help our campuses do the same thing. And it's been a journey. I mean, 2 years, and I feel like just now we are getting to the place where we are a team, and we're able to like really help be a support to campuses.
Now, remind me, and maybe it's changed, but so from like a reporting structure and that kind of thing, campus staff report to campus pastor, and it's kind of like a dotted line to central. Is that how that works?
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
And then we have set up like a mentor system with existing, say it's eKids. We have eKids mentors that help oversee some of our directors at the different locations, whether they be new or in a similar situation, so they can kind of collaborate as well. So you have some peer-to-peer support as well. But exactly. So the eKids director reports to campus pastor. That is their supervisor. And we are really a support to what's happening at the campus level.
Do the campus pastors, I mean, especially since you're in this kind of campus ministry role now, do they report to somebody else, or does that come back to you as well?
No, they report to somebody else. So there's actually 2 campus pastors overseeing all of them. Really regionally, we have one that oversees our Charlotte locations, one that oversees out of Charlotte locations. And then they report to the same lead team member that I report to. So we are peers as we're working with campus ministries. Really, if we don't have campus pastors on board, it's little we can do to help support or guide what's going on the campus anyway. So it works well that we're all working together.
Sure. And some people listening might be getting confused by all the lines and the organization and all that. But I mean, what that tells me is you kind of look at like campus pastors. That's one group of people, and they're led by, like you said, a couple of them. And then the rest of the ministry that happens at campus would fall under kind of your breadth. Even though they report to their campus pastor, you're kind of getting them all to work together. So those coworkers, that you just described, you both report to the same lead team member. You all have to be on the same page, right? Because that gets campus pastors and all the ministry leaders at each campus on the same page. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, for sure. Like we have to. I mean, it's just like any organization. If those at the top are not on the same page, you are essentially like running in different directions, and then it's just a matter of time before it all falls apart. So we have to work together, which is great. Like sometimes. What works centrally or what makes sense from a system built off of a campus really needs that campus understanding feel, that campus tension. that really work together to say like, hey, no, this is what real life looks like. And so we're trying to do better at making sure we do that. So all my team, like I asked them to all serve in the ministries that they lead, serve as a volunteer on a campus. So pick a campus near you and get plugged in just like a volunteer so you can really feel what you're creating and what you're a part of. And it's been a great way for us to not only evaluate, but really see what real life looks like on a campus level.
Yeah. And since this is a family ministry podcast, we're going to drill down on that part of it and probably not talking about guest services and all those other things.
Yeah.
We'll start with, and this is actually something I remember we addressed with Frank Beeler when he was leading the family life side there. Really, I think it was the second episode of my podcast. Okay. So that's like over 3 years ago. And it's frequency. Yeah, frequency of attendance.
Yes.
And I'm never going to remember what he said back then, but part of me would be interested to go look it up and see if it's changed. But you've been looking at household frequency using children's ministry, all that to figure out, how frequent people are attending and getting engaged and all that. So tell us what you've been finding.
So, what Frank did back in the day was, how often is a family coming 4 times a month, 3 times a month, 2 times, that kind of thing. And then, you continue to hear like, man, people are coming to church less and less. And it can be real discouraging when you start looking at something like that. You start measuring it and you're like, oh no, the church is like not everyone's priority as it once was. And so I was sitting in a meeting one day, we were talking about finances actually. And I told them, hey, we need a report for our campus pastors to show when someone is outside of their giving trend. So, you give every week or every other week, and then they're outside of that. They should have a report that tells them they need to follow up with those people. I left that room and I was thinking about our kids ministry, and I was like, we have a check-in process. So why wouldn't we have that same thing for our kids ministry? So we started putting every one of our families in a bucket, and it's like, do they attend weekly? Do they attend biweekly, monthly, or occasionally? And once we put them in a bucket, then we were able to give our eKids directors the opportunity to like, hey, you have a family that normally attends weekly that has missed 2 weeks. You should reach out to them. And it was great. And it was like a great way for a large church to feel very personal because people were being noticed when they weren't there. So then we decided to take it a step further. What does it look like when it comes to engagement? So for us, engagement looks like, are you giving? Are you serving? Are you in an E group? And so if I ask the campus pastor, hey, which one of those 3 people, if you have someone who's doing 3 people doing one of those things, who's coming more often to church? They would say, oh, by far it's the E team member. That's why I talk about it every single weekend. And it's like, okay, well, let's take a look at that. So we took engagement and overlaid it with these eKids buckets that we had created, this weekly, biweekly, monthly buckets. And it was interesting that we could look at a family who was, because, like for us, families are 22, 24% of our overall attendance. It's by far our biggest measurable bucket. I wish we could get people to check in the church and then we would have all kinds of data on them, but that's just impossible. And it's probably not going to happen for a little while. But so we have these measurements, and then we could take engagement, overlay it with that. And what we saw was people that were not engaged, so they're not serving, not giving, not in an e-group, are about 75% of the time are coming occasionally, which is like 11 or less times a year, which is crazy. But when you look at someone who is doing one of those 3 things, 50% of the time they're coming biweekly. And we were like, wow, what an incredible way to like grow attendance, help people get to church is really what we're trying to do, right? We just want to like help them understand, like, we need you here. You need to be here. We want to come around you as your church family. How do we help them do that? And I was like, showing the campus pastors this, if you could just get someone giving, serving, or in an e-group. And they said, well, yeah, that's what we do. That's why we're trying to get them in the groups, because they come like what, Jeff? Like 80% of the time they're coming every other week, because that's what our volunteers are scheduled for, every other week. So they just assume that that's how often they're coming. And that starts showing them like individually by their campus, no, this is actually your show rate for your volunteers. Those who are serving is only 5% higher than those that are in an e-group. And that's only a few percent higher than those that are giving. So really, if you could just get them in one of the three, you could make a huge impact, not only in your attendance, but in people's lives, getting them to come to church. So it's been interesting to help a campus pastor understand that, like, when you have someone who's connected to your campus, like, connected means something so different now. And so, of course, the whole conversation turned, like, a little discouraging at that moment. Like, but I remember back in the day when I used to go to church all the time. And I laughed at that because I was like, well, hold on a second. Let's talk about that. When you used to come to church all the time, did you ever miss? And they would be like, well, yeah. And so I took one guy and I said, how often did you miss? Like, you were probably out a couple times for vacation. You were probably out a couple times visiting family. And then he's like, oh, and I was a Boy Scout too. And I was like, well, how often did you take trips? Like 10 times a year. You missed like 10 weekends? Yeah. I'm like, you probably missed 14 times. You're definitely not a weekly attender. You were a biweekly attender. And it started shifting the understanding in the room of what used to be compared to what is now. And I was like, man, maybe guys, we just weren't measuring properly then, that we are measuring right now. And we can see, man, if it just gets someone connected, it makes a huge difference in that family coming to church more often. So, and again, this is our kids' data, so it's not like you get one person connected. You get one of parents connected, and you have the whole family showing up to Sunday, and it just makes a huge impact and an opportunity for us to really invest into that family, which is ultimately what we all want, right? We want them to come so we can love on them, and but we were trying to help them understand that if you don't, you can't address what you're unaware of. So we have to help everyone understand that even your volunteer base, if you shared the same thing 4 weeks in a row, your volunteer base really heard it maybe one time. And so, which was really encouraging for our campus pastors, because they get tired of talking about the same thing 3 weeks in a row, and they eventually stop talking about it. And this is a great way to help them understand the tendencies of our church. And then I was able to take it to them and say, now this is what your campus looks like. And of course, we have every variation of that number. So 50% is really like an average for our church, but it ranges everywhere from 75% of people serving come every other week to one campus that's in the upper 30%. So really their volunteer base is coming like once a month, if that. And so that gave them an opportunity to really do some work and do some ground game to really help get their volunteers back, but then also encourage people in groups and people giving to be there as well. So it's been interesting. It's interesting taking a look at it.
And you're saying that the data showed that there wasn't that big of a difference between people who volunteered, gave, or were in a group in terms of their attendance frequency.
Right. Yeah, there's like a 6% difference from one to the other. And which, you just make a lot of assumptions. Right. Yeah. You would think that the volunteers, because they're scheduled, someone's expecting them. But it's interesting. I mean, so I oversee e-groups too, so I do talk about groups and kids and youth and all the different things. But even in my e-group, I noticed some people, they have kids because our e-group is open to childcare, because I've got 3 girls of my own that are built-in babysitters, so they come. But it was funny watching their church attendance go up, because all of a sudden in our e-group, we're talking about the sermon on Sunday, and it was like, oh, I missed Sunday. And then I noticed they didn't miss the next week, and they didn't miss the next week. And so, yeah, it's just something as simple as getting them in a small group really made a huge difference in their priority of going to church.
Now, how about giving? Because here's what I'm wondering, and I'm just thinking, we do a survey every other year in our church. It's one of our best data points. We track data all the time, but that survey is really helpful because people are telling us, and we mostly do it to figure out what your background was before you got to our church in terms of your church experience.
Okay. Yeah.
But we ask other things, and for years we always asked involvement, groups, serving, giving. But for years, giving was the highest percentage. But again, if I just said, do you give, you could give $20 in a year and you'd say yes. So that didn't surprise me. Now we've since then changed the language of that to get a little more intentional about what that means. But in your case, when you said giving, what did that mean? Was there a threshold? Was there a frequency? Was it any amount given? Because I would think there's a big difference between I've given $20 a month or randomly, random amount, random time, versus I'm on some kind of a schedule.
Yeah. Yeah, we started talking about engagement with North Point Church and kind of got their metrics, and then decided we wanted to, we have our version of it. Our version of it would be if you're engaged in giving at Elevation, it's you've given 4 times this year, or you've given $2,500. So a lot went into the deciding of making it that, but that's where we're at. And so you are like connected in the way of giving, or engaged in giving, if you're above one of those two parameters at our church. So
Yeah, and that's not a very high bar, especially the 4 times. You could do 4 times $100, and
right,
for
exactly.
the vast majority of people, you're not even sniffing a tithe, but you're considering that like giving, and that's interesting.
Yeah, so that's why we talk like giving engagement, and not necessarily like who are your tithing members and how often are they coming. It's those that are giving more than once because of the 4 times, or $2,500, which is a substantial gift if you're giving 1 time a year. And and we do a big end of year expansion offering push, and so because of that, we wanted to include if there's a 1-time gift that was over a certain amount, that we would include them in that. So, and then that's like a rolling 52 weeks on the engagement side. So if you've been in a group, but then you were in a group, and then it's been 52 weeks since you joined the group, then you'd roll off of that. The same with volunteering on a team. I think you have to check in 4 times, and then you're considered like you've served that year. And then you have the 4 times giving, or the 2,500. And then again, it's 52 weeks, and then you'll roll off if you haven't done that again.
Yeah. Well, that's a lesson for everybody, right? Listening, is define engagement. What does that mean? Because groups and serving are a little more clear. And even that's not clear in every church, I should say. Like, what is serving? Is it being on a sub list? Is it you do that one event in the summer? Is it a monthly role? Like, what is that? But giving is where there's even more, there's a wide spread there of what you could define as giving.
Exactly.
So, and the other question I had is this. You mentioned bi-weekly volunteers. Is that true everywhere? Like, do kids volunteers serve bi-weekly, student ministry? Or is that just certain ministries and roles?
So most of our volunteer roles are bi-weekly. We have eKids leaders that we ask to be there every week. So they'll serve like every week 9:30 or every week 11:30 for consistency for parents and for the kids. But then as far as volunteers serving in those rooms, they're on an every other week schedule. Volunteers can serve more often than that. It's just something we've kind of set the bar at, like, hey, serve every other week, and then on your off week, you're a bringer. So be a bringer and bring someone with you back to church next week. Kind of show them the thing that you've been a part of, and and it's like part of one of the measurements too that we give to campuses to help them see what does your check-in ratios look like, how often are people really checking in. We took that same idea around our families off of their normal patterns, and it's the same with volunteers. It's a little easier with volunteers since their pattern should be every other week. And so if they missed a week, they show up on a report that you can go ahead and reach out to every volunteer who missed this week that was supposed to be scheduled and should have checked in. And then if they've missed 2 weeks, it's like a higher urgency report that they'll be on, and then they can reach out to them as well. Again, just to make sure that like people know that they've, that we're noticing that they're missing, or noticing that they weren't at church on Sunday.
And if they're a volunteer, they're going to get noticed in other ways too. You know what I mean? Like,
no, for sure.
We were counting on you and you weren't there, versus if you just attend. But it sounds like
when the ratio is off in the room.
Yeah, exactly. So you're saying that overall, though, people attend about half the time. Is that what you said earlier? Or is it a little less than that?
Right. Yeah.
And do you think, because I was wondering if you'd come back and tell me, because again, I don't remember what Frank's number was, but I remember a lot of churches, my church included, the number's about 45% of the time. So it's close to half. And I was wondering if you were to come back and say, we looked at frequency again, and it's a third, or something like that. It's less,
right.
Or I don't know if it grew. But you're saying it's still hovering around that half mark. And you did all this with kids attendance. That's how you figured out. So like the
Yeah, we do
volunteer
with kids
who,
attend. So it's not it's not like all volunteer numbers. That's a different report. This one was specific to like people attending church. And so you see e-kids check in, and then it's like, all right, now are they engaged in any way as well? Because when we look at their, most volunteer bases across our campuses, they're checking in. Like this last weekend, I think we were at 70 something percent of the volunteers that were scheduled for the weekend had checked in for the weekend. So that part's great, but that includes a lot of, singles or married without kids. But this other report was really looking at like, how can we take the largest check-in database and see attendance trends across all of our campuses. And so eKids check-in was like a great way for us to do that because it includes, I think in the last 52 weeks, we've had close to 14,000 families check in. So, I mean, those are like household units, which is incredible. And man, we've been so blessed as a church to have like that. But to me, it's like, okay, then if God's going to bless us with that, then we need to measure that and figure out everything we can know about that. And so figuring out attendance patterns and helping our programming teams and our campus pastors understand, who they're talking to every week when they, because often we think we're talking to the same group because our circle is the same, like our staff is the same and they're there every week. And you have a few of those key leaders, key volunteers that are there every week. But then you start looking past that circle and you're like, oh, no, that's right. They haven't been here 2 weeks. They haven't been here in 3 weeks. And then you get it really into the majority of your volunteer base when you start getting past those smaller circles that surround us.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and that's good for you to think about. That's a huge number of families. Most churches can't even relate to 14,000 families. But that you're thinking, how do we serve them well? How do we use data data is totally impersonal, but then how do we use it to make personal connections? That's a really good thing.
Right.
There was one other thing I was thinking about as it relates to that. Oh, okay. So when you talk about this, what it makes me think about is, Carrie Nieuwhof has pushed for years this idea that engagement drives attendance now, not the other way around. And that's the way we used to think about it, like come attend and then get engaged. And that's still technically how it happens, but like they come attend very infrequently. Then if they do get engaged in some way, like you measured, then their attendance goes up. Did your campus pastors, did they hear that as like, you know what, maybe I should focus a little bit more on getting people in volunteers groups or giving, not only for their benefit and for the church and all that, but just to increase their attendance? Like this is maybe the best way for them to get them to show up more often.
Yeah, it was great. We have a couple guys who are like, they're just super smart. And when it comes to metrics, and so their immediate next question was, well, then what's the first step? What's the trend of our first time guests and their first step into engagement? Is it an E-team? Since we talk about it all the time. And I actually was able to show them that it's not actually serving, it's actually in a small group, which is crazy because we just don't talk about small groups a lot. I don't think we talk about them enough. But we noticed with the trends of our first time guests that we were measuring that out like 90 days. And the trend was that they were more likely to get into a small group than they were into an E-team. And the crazy part of that is the fact that we haven't been talking about small groups like every weekend, like most of our campuses are doing. So that was eye-opening for the campus pastors to say, oh, maybe we need to focus like the beginning part of the year when a lot of people decide like, I'm going to go to church every week in January. And like, instead of talking about how you can get connected to a team, maybe it's, hey, this is how you can get connected to a small group. And then from there, we can talk to them about how to get connected to a team. I think often, we allow some of the greatest tensions that we have, the fire that we see on Sunday, and we're like, oh, we need more people in our kids ministry. Oh, we need more people in our youth ministry. Hey, CP, we need you to talk about serving. And we run to that fire, and then we get as many people as we can. And if we would think about it long term and start thinking about what are people's natural trends and natural bents, well, if it is small groups, then let's get them into a small group. And then 6 months from now, we'll start seeing some of those people transition into serving on teams. And maybe, just maybe, we'll have people stay a little bit longer or, really find a place to call home. And then we can take them like we see in these numbers and these metrics, we can get them to start coming to church a little more often, and we can, be the church for them. And so that's really what we're like. That was their next question. How do we do this better? And really, it's us looking at, and what are we talking about? Because for years we talked about, we were bold, Nick. We were talking about, we need your seat. Like, hey, if this isn't the church for you, like find a church for you, but we need your seat if you're just going to come and watch. Like, that's not what we're about. We're all about participation. So like, jump in, serve, let's go. And, we have a lot of portable locations. And so obviously people look around and they're like, oh, there's a lot of work to be done. But really, if we're like here to meet people where they're at and love on them to the place where they can finally get to that point where they want to contribute in some way, really it's figuring out what works for you, the guest, not what works for us, the ministry, because we can get those out of whack real quick.
Do you have any idea what the numbers were, the difference between how many people would get in a group versus how many would serve?
So our first-time guest numbers, we were at 10% of our first-time guests within the first 90 days were signing up for a group. And I believe it was close. So it was like 7 or 8% were getting into a team. But the eye-opening part was we usually spend 3, maybe 4 Sundays a year talking about small groups. And in this last year, our campus pastors have spent a lot of time talking about giving and serving as the first steps to being engaged at Elevation Church. So when you trade off 48 weekends to do one thing for 4 weekends to do the other, and they tend to do get into a small group a little more than the one you're talking about every single weekend. It's a little bit bigger than those percentages, seem to show.
Mm-hmm. Was giving one of the, like, so if getting in a group was 10% did it in 90 days and 7% served in 90 days, was giving more or less? Was it in the middle? Did you track that one?
Yeah, giving was a little bit more than the other two, which is encouraging because we do talk about your opportunity to give back to God, and it's all His, and so we talk about that every single worship experience, and so it was a little bit higher than the 10% for groups. I don't have the number right offhand, but I do remember it was in mid-teens. So yeah, my guess would be 13-15% had started giving in some way. But again, like we said, like we determined giving at that 4 times a year, so they could have done that in the first 90 days. But yeah.
So I could talk about this all day, and this is something that actually a lot of churches don't track. And actually, there's a number of churches that leaders from churches, actually from our kind of our next gen tribe that we're connected with, that are kind of looking at some of this in their own church and really just guests to attendance. I would love to do even more like you're looking at, how many are taking steps to get engaged in the first 90 days, but it's hard enough, getting churches to focus on counting guest numbers and doing that in an apples to apples consistent way and all that. So I could talk about that all day, but I do want to talk about youth ministry. You mentioned that's like something shifted there. That's not exactly right now, something that's under your scope, but you could still talk to us about some things you're, changing and things that are different, small groups, issues you've been trying to address. I mean, so give us a peek and decide what's going on there in some of those conversations.
Yeah. So 2 years ago, we, started trying to figure out what's youth ministry going to look like at our church. Up until that point in our churches, we're going on, we're 13 now, 14 next year. And up for the first 10 years, we would say, like, we don't have youth ministry. We are a youth ministry. Our pastor, young and exciting worship experiences are built like, your ideal worship experience would be like reach youth. And we know that, like, hey, as we get older as a church, we're going to need to make sure we have a quality youth presence. And we want to make sure that we have ways to invest in the youth at all of our locations. So starting a youth ministry with multiple locations all at one time is it's a little tricky, but it's super helpful when you realize, like, man, we have to keep this thing pretty simple so that we can replicate it across, 19 different locations. And so we really just talked about, from everything I've learned at the Next Gen gathering to everything I've done with Orange, it's been so helpful to be reminded that, it always comes back to the small group leader, that you can have a great youth director, but if you don't have great small group leaders, you're fighting an uphill battle. We are good at creating great worship experiences. And we feel like, man, that's a strength of ours, but that's only a portion of what youth ministry really is. Like when I look back at being in a youth group years and years and years ago, it's been too long now. That I remember my youth director. I remember my youth pastor. I remember the guy who was like leading my group. And, when he and I used to go to lunch and we would talk about real life. And so we were talking through like, hey, we don't have great small group leaders, then we're not going to win. We're just not going to win at all. And so we've spent the last 2 years just trying to redefine what does it look like to be a small group leader here at Elevation Church. And we've tried all kinds of things from having, we call them rhythm nights. So rhythm night is like the large group gathering, but we decided like, hey, there has to be the small group portion of the large group gathering. So rhythm night for us is like, there's a social component where there's like fun and the party and all that kind of stuff, so that you can invite people to it. And it feels awesome. And then of course there needs to be a teaching component, whether that's someone preaching or a conversation. And then small group time. There needs to be that time where we can have youth talk about what they just heard and really process with someone who is, someone that's trusted, someone that they, know and have had time to spend with. And really it's been taking that and developing it over the last 2 years. It's crazy to see the growth we've been able to have in like a large group event like Rhythm Night. And then there was even times where we had to like reevaluate, hey, this looks awesome. And on social media, it looks great. But we realized, hey, it's not growing. And if it's not growing, that means youth aren't like coming back. They're not coming to it. And that's where their e-group is. So we decided to take a step back from everyone having a rhythm night at all these different locations and saying, hey, we're going to still do a rhythm night because we have a worship that we want to have, and we want to get new songs out for youth to listen to. And so we're going to continue to do that at our broadcast location, but we're going to change up our whole strategy. And we're not going to do rhythm nights at all of our locations. We are going to focus on small groups and the small group leader, because the event became the thing everyone was focused on, and the small groups became the thing that was second or third priority on everyone's list. So that shift just happened maybe 3 months ago, and it's been great. We do things a little differently. So it's like our head youth guy, instead of reporting to me with campus ministries, we said, hey, it needs to be in alignment with everything else we're doing youth. And a lot of what we're doing is in the creative side. So that's why he reports to him, but I still get to speak into that. And from a group's perspective and the group systems that we've built with our adult groups, we're coming alongside our youth ministry and really helping them build some quality systems to invest in the small group leader, as opposed to pointing to the big, awesome event and trying to just do something crazy to get youth to come back out. Because when we really looked at the metrics, it was like, hey, they're not coming back every time, which means we're missing out on small group time. And if that's really the thing that's the heart of our youth ministry, then we need to scrap the thing that looks awesome for the thing that really is going to be lasting. And so that's what we had to kind of change up the model. But yeah.
And so now small groups for students meet weekly. Is that a certain night of the week? Is it any night? Or are they just all over? And then do rhythm nights happen at all centrally? Or like what? Because the rhythm nights used to happen monthly at every campus, and now it's a little different. Tell us like what that schedule looks like now.
Yeah, so rhythm nights used to be third Sunday night of the month, and basically we did them at all of the locations. Of course, they're done a little differently at different locations just because of size of the campus, size of the youth ministry. But we encouraged everyone, like, we're going to resource you. It's going to be great. Let's go. And then once we realized we were so focused on the event side that we needed to change that, now what we do is we have just at our broadcast location, so it's in like South Charlotte. It's also reachable by like 9 of our locations, so a little less than half, but 9 of our locations can drive there. And the other locations, we encourage them to still get together with their youth, do like a watch party and have fun with it and watch it. But yeah, then as far as small groups, they're meeting every week. Some of the campuses have started doing, I think other people call them like city groups or something like that, where you get like a hub groups. You get a bunch of groups to come together, have fun. But then there's small group time built into that. And yeah, now we're just trying to like make sure. One of the things we've been talking about the last year is that no one leads alone. No one should be leading any group by themselves. Just for the leader's sanity, but also for the youth. If you have one person who steps out and they're the only person leading that group, now the group has no leader. Now we've noticed that, like, man, when a group leader steps away and there's not a second person to lead that's been there for a while, those youth tend to not connect to another group. We'll try real hard to like connect them to someone great, but we just see the numbers that they're just not connecting. It's like they gave it one shot and then we failed them. And so we were like, okay, this is not okay. We need to figure this out. So we just started the mantra, no one leads alone. And everyone has a co-leader part of their group. And our groups are built like high school guys, high school girls, middle school guys, middle school girls. Mm-hmm. That's been really helpful. And it's amazing watching some of the group leaders that have been doing this for a little while. They're like, oh, I get someone to lead with me. This is awesome. And some of those are raising up some great leaders to go launch another one. And then it's a great developmental tool as well for developing new leaders, because they really get to see how it's done right before we launch out to another one.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't know how recent this change is, but does it seem like it's bearing fruit? Are small groups growing when the big event has now kind of changed and, isn't at each campus? Or maybe it's too soon. I don't even know.
It is a little too soon. I mean, we are, there was a lot of cleanup from that, because what I did learn after changing it is that we had a lot of groups that were built around the event, the Rhythm Night event. And that's really where they met and they led only in those large group formats and not necessarily meeting outside of it. That was something we had asked campuses to do, but we're learning wasn't happening. And so we've had a lot of cleanup, and it's, again, it's back to that household frequency. It could either be discouraging, where you can realize, like, man, it's a big opportunity for us to learn a lot, and so make sure this doesn't happen again. And that's where we're at right now. I am hopeful that it's going to be awesome. I hope our group leaders understand how much we love them and want to invest in them. I have heard from some of our long-lasting group leaders how much they love the fact that, like, pushing to the event is no longer a weight that they carry, that they can actually, like, it's just about my youth. It's just about me getting together with the girls, or me getting together with the guys. And to me, once that language shift happened, like, that really, like, set them up for success.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's wrap up talking a little bit of partnering with parents. There's some things you're trying to work on. You mentioned a Parent Connect event that you did at one location, about to do a second. I'd love to start with that and just tell me what that was and how it went.
Yeah. So, again, we're getting a little older as a church, realizing that, we do great things for first-time guests. We do great things for people who are connected to our church. And I started looking around, and I'm like, wait, what are we doing for our parents? It's a group, a demographic that really is untapped at our church. And so we're like, well, before we try to do something at 19 locations, let's pilot something and learn some things first before we just jump into the whole thing. So we did took one of our campuses with a larger percentage of families that attended, and we did a how to talk to your kids about sex, because it'll bring parents out to an event like that, talking about sex. And And it was great. It was we did it in an auditorium. It was now our auditoriums, like the chairs aren't nailed down or anything, so we were able to bring in round tables. We essentially had everyone from preschool to high school represented in the room. We had people RSVP, so we knew who was coming, and we were able to put a group leader at each one of the round tables. So, like the high school table had a group leader who that group leader has high school kids. And then as people came in, we would put them in or at the tables with the groups that have kids the same age. So there would be that commonality that for afterwards when they could talk about some of the things we talked through and what they're going to do and ideas that like kind of stuck out to them. And they'd be able to connect on the fact that like, oh, my 13-year-old is dealing with that as well. Or, my preschool kid, I didn't realize I needed to start talking to them about these things. And then what we did was the call to action at the end of the night was, hey, we've got some great parenting e-group leaders. They happen to be at your tables, and they would love to sign you up to join them for a 6-week study of parenting through the phases. And so then we gave everyone the opportunity to jump in the group, buy the resources, and really just partner e-kids and our e-groups together. And it was a win-win situation. So it went really well. We were trying to figure out, what that looks like to do that across other locations. We took the model and then got it out to some of our e-kids and e-group leaders. We've had some other campuses actually do it on their own, which some went really well, and others we had lots of room for growth. And we're getting ready to do another one and to talk about technology. And so yeah, we're gonna do the same thing. Now, it's tricky as we usually do our e-group pushes. In January, we do them in June, and then we do them again in end of August as we get into the different seasons. So we have to be ahead of those and have the event planned, ready, and executed so that they can jump into that group. So they're not already in a group and I wish I would have known. I would have gotten this parenting e-group. But it was encouraging to see how many parents were excited about something that was a felt need, like parenting e-groups. And so yeah, it was great. I mean, again, we had 65 parents come out to this thing, and for a campus that's a little over 2,000. So yes, I would have loved to see more people, but you learn from it, and then you get the opportunity to hey, let's do this better next time. Or yep.
Yeah. Well, and I would say your experience with that kind of turnout isn't odd. You can adjust it for size of church. But
yeah.
I would say that I've told people before, I've probably said it on the podcast, the most I've ever seen, I shouldn't say the most, there's always exceptions, but the high end I see churches get for parent things, trainings, events, whatever you want to call them, is 10% of the church. So a campus of 2,000, highest I'd see be 200. And that even applies to friends of mine who they'll bring in a speaker from the outside, bring in a Doug Fields, and childcare, and it's at Friday nights, almost like a date night. And it'd be great. It'd be great.
Yeah.
It'd be great attendance, the whole deal, spend thousands of dollars and get about 10%, of the 10. That's the high end.
Right.
Most churches are going to see what you saw.
Right.
Because I think that's kind of the norm. And one thing that I did hear a leader say actually at Next, which, that's where you and I originally met, an event for Next Gen pastors. One of the guys there had kind of a cool strategy where they did different classes, for parents, I guess, throughout the year. And kind of their metric was how many parents came to a class, not all of them or each, what was the attendance each, but how many parents came to a class that year. And what percent of that was, of the overall maybe parent attendance or something. So I thought that was a kind of a smart way to measure it, because you're not going to get half. You're not going to get 80%.
Yeah.
You're not going to, you know what I mean? You're already speaking to a third of the parents that come to your church. So then you're going to get a fraction of that.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a smart thing. Is there anything else where in terms of partnering with parents and all that you're working on?
Yeah, so our next one is we're doing marriage and parenting. So we're trying to just broaden the scope a little bit and bring people in who are, not yet parents, but try to resource them as well. And then, that one is coming up here in 2 weeks, I think. So we're just trying to, again, just trying some different things before we just mass produce something for all the locations, or stamp something as hey, this is it, this is the thing. try to stay, married to the vision, but like the strategy is going to keep changing, guys. So let's just stay on it, and we're going to continue to just like reach these parents and resource them as best we can. So we'll try this next one, and we'll learn from it, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah. I meant to ask in that first one and even this next one, who's like the main voice? Who's leading that? Who's the person up front kind of teaching that content?
So in the first one, I brought in 2 staff members, and then we have someone on staff who is as a counselor. And so we just asked her kind of some questions, and then we had the different parent perspectives from having older kids and younger kids. And then I just kind of emceed the whole thing, had a living room set up on the stage and tried to keep it right at an hour so we could honor people's time. But, really just real talk and, obviously lots of research and having the counselor talk through, her and I talked ahead of time, like what are some of the things that you're experiencing dealing with when talking to kids, and what parts of that leads back to miscommunication or lack of expectation with parents and kids, and parents, the way they lead their kids or the way they're not talking to their kids, what they've missed out on. And now it causes these kids to go ask their friends for advice or, for understanding and stuff like that. So we took all of that and just and led with that. And it was great. I had my wife up there. We have 3 girls. They're all teenage girls now. And so she was able to walk through like, hey, this is how we had to talk. This is what I would have done differently. This is what worked really well. And then the different personalities of my 3 girls are like night and day. So they that was a learning tool all on its own.
Yeah, so. That's awesome. I mean, like most churches, when it comes to partnering with parents, you just got to try stuff and try again and serve the ones who show up. And, there's just lots of it that can feel, it can feel hard because it doesn't feel like the success you want. Or even like going back to in the beginning, you talked about 10% of the people that new guests get in a group in the first 90 days. Well, 10% feels awful. You know what I mean? Like off the cuff. Yeah. But then you realize if churches got together and talked, you realize that's actually pretty good because you only keep about 20% anyway, period, like who come back.
Right.
And then, how many of them are you going to get to take that big of a step in the first 3 months? I mean, 10% ends up being a really good thing. So that's just one of those things where I think it's helpful to know what is good, what is and good is getting that many parents out for an event or 10% to get in a group. And sometimes people don't know that. So I hope maybe this would be helpful for them. Well, cool. I could talk more and more about a bunch of these things. We didn't even get to some of the value stuff, which I mean, honestly, when I think about Elevation Church, a few things stand out. One of them is culture and values and all that. So maybe we'll have to get you back on and we could talk about that again. But how can people connect with you and all that if they have any questions or follow on social media?
So, you can follow me. It's at Bates South. I'm from the north, and I came down to Charlotte. So the Bateses were in the south, so that's why it's at Bates South. And, you can always reach out to me at Elevation Church. So it's jbates@elevationchurch.org. And, we'd love to help anyone because anytime it seems like I'm talking about this stuff, I'm learning about this stuff. And, it's been great. It's been great to have great resources like your podcast, Nick. So grateful because I feel like I don't ask great questions all the time, but you do. And so I'm like, hey, yes, that's the question I meant to ask. Yes, exactly. And then it's just been a great resource, stepping into something like this from a campus pastor role, which is like, oh yeah, he'll figure it out. And you're just like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. And I think the weight of ministry is already great. And then to have the opportunities that we get, it's just mind blowing. So I want to make the best of it. So this has been great. And I already took some notes too. So thanks for teaching me while we're talking about all this stuff.
Yeah, I got my notes too. I'm thinking about the action items we can all do. I mean, how cool to be if all of our churches were measuring some of the things you're measuring and then, could talk about it. Because again, that's part of the problem in church world is we don't know. what's going on, what's happening, if people are taking steps, if they're not, what's success, what's not, all that stuff. So I appreciate you doing that work and figuring that out for your church and coming on the podcast to talk about it. Thanks.
Hey, you bet. Thank you so much.
Well, it was good to talk with Jeff Bates and hear all about like what's going on at Elevation Church with the kids ministry, student ministry. They're always, doing unique things, it seems like. So I loved hearing about what they're working on, where they feel like they need to improve, what they're exploring. And here are a few action items I thought of coming out of that interview. One is to define engagement at your church. So he gave you kind of their definition. How would you define engagement at your church? And again, not just kids and student ministry, maybe church-wide. And then how does kids and student ministry play a part of that? And then measure it. You can't really measure it until you define what it is. So do that and see what it looks like for your church and look at the numbers, not just those numbers, but other numbers, just like we talked about with Jeff, frequency of attendance, anything like that, volunteer percentages, all of that. And then the third action step is after you define engagement and see where you are and look at your numbers, I'd say pick one thing to improve. What's the one area that if you could, move that forward, would make the biggest difference, would kind of impact all the other ones, and focus on that for a season and see what you can get out of that. So hope you enjoyed that interview. You can get the notes and all that at nickblevins.com/episode 177. Don't forget to check out Ministry Boost, both the webinars part and ministryboost.org/screens. There's no link for that on the site yet. There might be by the time you listen to this, but you'll want to just type that in and you can learn about how to put video and audio and image content on your screens for just $10 a month and really upgrade your environment that way. But we've got those 2 webinars coming up, Keeping Kids Safe Online and Developing Leaders. Hope to see you at one or both of those. And as always, you can go back and rewatch them. It's not the same as being there live because you can't ask questions and all that. But we have a big announcement on that February 12th webinar, Developing Leaders. So I hope you'll be there for that. You can register online. But that's it for this week. So thanks for listening. Hope you have a great week, and we'll catch you next time on the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.